welcome to the lecture 5 of our course, and we will be talking about the topic what do we do in linguistics. So, today we will be talking about different levels of linguistic analysis, and we will be talking about these different aspects: phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics and pragmatics. We will be talking about what do we actually do in these domains of linguistics. So, I am sure you have this question in your mind about the actual work of a linguist. What does a linguist do? This is a question that you are asking yourself after joining this course, and I hope you remembered that we already discussed about different perspectives of the concept of language in our first lecture. So, when we talked about the different perspectives, we also talked about the idea of linguistic analysis, but we did not explain them. So, in this class we shall be talking about different components and different levels of linguistic analysis. Basically, we are talking about the at a very basic level, and we will be talking about them in detail later, and there are some specific units for all these levels. We will learn about them later as well. Here I have listed the major components or levels that you can figure out. Phonetics is the analysis of speech sounds, phonology analysis of sound patterns, morphology analysis of word formation, syntax analysis of phrases and sentences, semantics analysis of meaning, and pragmatics analysis of context dependent meaning. So, we will be dealing with all these levels in this course, and today we will be getting an overview of these levels, what we actually do in phonetics, phonology, etc., and we also have some very small puzzles for you. So, the first component is phonetics, and maybe this domain is familiar to some of you. We basically analyze speech sounds in phonetics. Speech sounds means the sounds that we use for human language. We use some special symbols which is formally known as the International Phonetic Alphabet. We use them to represent all the different sounds in human language. So, we do this as a part of our training in phonetics. We also learn to perceive these speech sounds and transcribe them with the help of the International Phonetic Alphabet. In phonetics, we also talk about the use of articulators, I mean the organs that are useful to produce the speech sounds. Also the articulators in our vocal tract, we talk about them, and we also talk about the classification of speech sounds. There are certain parameters for classifying the speech sounds. We will be talking about them later in detail, but for now I have given only one example, the position of articulators. So, according to the different position of articulators, we can classify speech sounds, and then there are some other parameters. We will be talking about them in detail. Apart from the sound segments, for example vowels or consonants, we also analyze the supra segments like tone, stress, etc., as a part of phonetic analysis. And we note if any particular sound or sounds are modified by the presence of adjacent or neighboring sounds. So, here I have listed some examples for you. I am asking you to notice the pronunciation of the following examples from English. So, in enough, we write it with GH, but we pronounce it like f. Women, we are using the vowel O, but we are pronouncing it like E. And nation, we are representing the sound sh through the graphic representation of the letter T. So, there are certain mismatches, right. So, you can say that correspondence between sounds and letters are not uniform everywhere. This is also a major concern of phoneticians, they also try to do a lot of things with this mismatch. In phonetics, along with the articulatory part, we pay attention to the acoustic analysis of sounds, for example, frequency, amplitude, etc. Now, let us come to the next part, which is phonology. Phonology is different from phonetics, though we are dealing with sounds. So, distinctive sounds in a language can vary according to the context of a particular language. So, in phonology we talk about patterns of sounds which have some kind of interference of the context, and we also talk about the representation of those distinctive sounds. We talk about the construction of syllables and specific structures of syllables. We are familiar with the term syllable from school grammar, but maybe we do not know about the different parts of syllable. Syllable has its internal structure, and we also talk about them in the domain of phonology. We also talk about the different smaller components of sound, how we can break a single sound into specific features. These are known as distinctive features, and we will be also talking about them in future. So, when we conduct a phonological analysis of any language, we initially create a list of sounds, we formally call them inventory. We figure out certain rules for the occurrence of the specific sounds in a specific context and pattern. Now, I have some more examples for you. If you pay attention to the English words sun and some, you will find that there is a contrast, right? But the contrast is happening where there is a change of only one sound. And in the second example, if you pay attention to the n sound, in the following examples, one thing and one egg, the two n's are actually not very similar. So, they have some kind of difference that you will be figuring out later. So, these two examples can help us to understand that the patterns of sounds vary according to languages, and these patterns are different based on particular languages. Another quick puzzle based on phonology. So, English k sound sounds like g between vowels and k elsewhere. Do you agree with this statement? So, if you agree, I will request you to find some examples and list the examples for yourself, and if you can't find any example, think about it again. Along with the puzzle, I will also ask you to think about restriction of particular sounds in the languages that you speak. Is there a role of context? Is there an example where the context determines the differences? So, I am requesting you to think about these two questions before you move to the actual study of phonology later. The next component is morphology, where we analyze structures of words and different parts of word. So, when we form words or create words, we basically add something to the beginning, end or middle of another word. So, how do we account for them? This is something that we ask in the domain of morphology. We create words by putting two or more existing words together, or we also mark words to show certain grammatical concepts like number, case, agreement and tense. If you remember these concepts somehow from school grammar, it will be helpful. If you can't remember, in future we will be talking about them. So, in the domain of morphology, we also discuss a few more processes for creating words and try to figure out the relationship between sound pattern and word formation. Now, I have given you some data from the language Persian, where khar, this pronunciation is khar, is to buy, and id is the past tense. So, you have this data, kharidam I bought, kharidi you singular bought, kharid he bought, and na kharidam I did not buy. So, from this very small data I am asking you to figure out how many word parts are there. You can figure out that there are different parts of word and they have different meaning, which is also indicated initially. So, if you figure out that there are different word parts, you will be able to realize that what we try to do in morphology is actually like the data that you are going to analyze. And you will explore this domain more when we will be discussing in detail the domain of morphology. The next domain that we will be discussing is syntax. Syntax, from the name you can understand it is related to sentences, and in syntax we basically categorize words. What do we mean by categorize words? If I ask you to think about the different grammatical categories, you can think about for example noun, verb, preposition, adverb, etc., right. So, these are the categories and we categorize words for various purposes. In syntax we do categorize words and we also combine words to create phrases and sentences. So, whenever we are creating phrases and sentences in any language, we follow certain rules. We cannot create them randomly. If you remember the first and second class, we were actually talking about these rules and I told you that we will be talking about rules in future as well. So, we combined these different parts into phrases and sentences following certain rules, and some words actually choose what they can combine with in a phrase. We figure out why and how of the combination strategies. So, there are certain words which can choose what they can combine with it in a phrase. So, we will figure out the role of this particular word, and of course, these words have different names. We will talk about them later. In syntax, we draw diagrams of the structures of sentences to figure out the different components of a sentence and phrases, and we also believe that all languages have some commonness in terms of the structure of sentences. If you remember Chomsky's words that we discussed in first two classes, we did talk about this commonness, that there is something common in all languages. But we also need to know that some languages vary systematically in terms of the sentence formations. Remember, I am using the word systematically very carefully here, because the variation is not random. Even the variation is systematic. I mean, you cannot say that any language can vary in any random way. We can account for the systematic nature of variation. So, one more puzzle for sentences, and I am asking you to figure out the ungrammatical sentences from the list of 8 sentences. So, the instructor told the students to study, the instructor suggested the students to study. Please note down for yourself whether both the sentences are okay for you or not. We did talk about the concept of well-formedness, ill-formedness, grammaticality and acceptability in the previous classes. So, I am sure you remembered them and they will help you to figure out the ungrammatical nature of sentences, if any. The sentences 3 and 4, the man asked for a hot coffee, the man requested for a hot coffee, it should be hot, and the pilot landed the jet landed. So, there are certain differences that can be observed from the sentences. You can figure it out and you can also comment on them, and the final task for you will be to judge their ungrammaticality. Example 7 and 8, the journalist wrote the article, the article wrote. So, please note down the comments about all these sentences in relation to ungrammaticality. So, we will move to the next component of linguistic analysis, which is semantics. Semantics is all about meaning. So, we talk about derivation of meaning from words and sentences in the domain of semantics. We try to understand how sentence structure is used in the production and understanding of meaning. So, we will bring syntax again in the domain of semantics, because these two are interconnected, and the structure of sentences will also give us some clue related to the meaning component. So, I have one small thinking task at this point. Some aspects of meaning will not be determined by the meaning of their parts, and I have two sentences. What is a scratch doing in your car? What is my pen doing in her pocket? So, if you think about it literally, there is a scratch and the scratch is doing something, there is a pen and pen is doing something, it is not the meaning, right. So, the meaning of the smaller components of the sentence are not directly contributing to the meaning of the entire sentence, there is something else happening. So, that is why the domain of meaning or semantics is complex, and we need to think about the complexity in terms of structure as well. The last domain that I am introducing to you is the domain of pragmatics. It is related to the domain of semantics, but there is a slight difference. In pragmatics, we talk about the speaker's meaning. So, what the speaker intends to mean, how the beliefs and attitudes of the speaker, setting, context, everything contributes to the meaning. So, if you see, for example, an advertisement where it is written sale babies and toddlers, that advertisement does not tell you that babies and toddlers are being sold. The sale is for the babies and toddlers. So, the intention is conveyed through the advertisement, but the literal meaning is not intended, and meaning is definitely dependent on the context. So, if you ask a question, did you eat the pizza? If you request someone, please eat the pizza. If there is a command, please eat the pizza, and if you state something, you ate the pizza. So, there are differences, right. So, meaning depends on certain factors. In the domain of pragmatics, we also do the analysis of politeness of the speech. For example, if you think about the focus on public domain or social media, we do talk about, or this is a domain where people are doing a lot of research now, how polite people are on public domain or social media. So, this is another component of pragmatics, and I have three more sentences for you at this point to help you think about the context dependent meaning. Imagine a dentist is saying, my 11:30 cancelled, so I had an early lunch. So, it does not mean that 11:30 is a person and he cancelled something. It means that somebody booked an appointment at 11:30 and that person cancelled the appointment, right. So, the person is not uttering the entire sentence, but whoever is listening to this sentence like you did, you figured out the meaning. So, whatever the speaker intended to convey, it has been conveyed. If the teacher says you can borrow my Shakespeare, it does not mean that you can actually borrow a person named Shakespeare. You borrow a book written by Shakespeare, and when the teacher says you can borrow my Shakespeare, the meaning is perfectly conveyed. If the waiter at a restaurant say that the chicken sandwich did pay the bill, so it is actually not, it should be did not pay the bill. So, it is basically a very a different kind of meaning that is being conveyed. So, meaning is very much speaker centric and context dependent, and you have to understand this properly. Along with these domains that I have mentioned previously, what else do we do? We definitely do something else, but we primarily use the analysis based on the domains that I have just mentioned. Based on those domains, we reflect on certain other domains, and let me mention certain domains which are useful in this regard. So, we use linguistic analysis for all these levels in some other areas of linguistics. For example, sociolinguistics, which is basically linguistic analysis and societal analysis, which is slightly different from sociology of language. So, in sociolinguistics, we do linguistic analysis in terms of societal analysis. So, that can be anything, that can be analysis of phonetics, that can be an analysis of morphology or syntax, but we are actually using some linguistic analysis in the domain of sociolinguistics. Along with that, psycholinguistic, which is linguistic analysis for psychological analysis, it is an overlapping domain between linguistics and psychology. We conduct some kind of linguistic analysis, maybe morphological or semantic or phonetic, but we use them for certain purpose to understand certain psychological aspects. So, whatever we learn through linguistic analysis of different levels, we use them for various purposes, and we will be discussing them later. So, through this lecture, we try to get an overview of the different levels, and we shall be dealing with these details in the course. And we also got an overview of what a linguist basically tries to do, and we will be actually learning to do some linguistic analysis. These are some of the references that you can also check. Thank you.